Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree. Don't question my intensity, bravery. Similar to agencies that want to see you fold. So just pray for me. Pray for me. Einstein with my energy.
Welcome to the Scribble Notes podcast. How are you doing on this beautiful day? At least where I am.
Well, it's pouring with rain here, but I'm doing just fine.
Why don't you introduce yourselves for the listeners? Let them know who you are.
Indeed, yes. My name is Helen Garraway, and I'm an epic fantasy author. You can see the Sentinel Series behind me. So I began writing in, I think it was about 2016, and I just wrote 7 books. They all just flowed. Obviously, my creative logjam just broke and I just wrote. And since then, I suppose I wrote for over like 2 years, and then I started publishing. I started investigating whether to try and do a traditional publishing, and I investigated self-publishing, and I ended up deciding to self-publish, and I've currently published 4 books and 2 novellas in the Sentinel series, which is epic fantasy, quest, sort of lost and found family trope sort of thing, and follows a King's Ranger who discovers treason at the highest level, and he then goes through many trials and tribulations to try and figure out how to rescue his people and his world from this ancient threat. So it's been fun.
I love it. I love it already. What got you writing in 2016?
I think it was a combination of things. There was a lot of changes in my life around that time. Unfortunately, my mum passed away. My daughter went off to university, and I was suddenly in a house alone with time, I suppose, on my hands. And I started writing some, I think, just because I then had the opportunity and the time to write. And I've sort of come to the conclusion since that it was probably pretty cathartic, dealing with my mum's passing and dealing with my daughter leaving the nest and, things like that. It was like everything always seems to happen at once in my life, all the major events all at once, then 10 years have passed and then they'll all happen again, So I think that was probably one of them. But I just have always been a bookworm. I love books. I read virtually anything, though fantasy is my love, which is why I write fantasy. I write what I wanted to read. And to be quite honest, I started writing it for me. I wanted to read, it was what I love to read. And then I got fed up with reading it on my laptop, and I thought, well, I've written all these books. I should do something with them, And then I started going through all the editing and investigating the self-publishing, and actually decided to publish them.
How have they been received? What has the feedback been like?
Yeah, I mean, I've done pretty well. I've only just got my first 2-star. So I've done really well, actually. It's been very well received. And my second book just got a 5-star reader's favorite review. And they very highly recommended, they absolutely loved it and said anybody who reads my series is going to adore it. So that was really a nice confidence boost. So it's sort of one extreme to the other, but it's all been 3 stars and above, and mainly 4s and 5s, and very well received. And I think what the nice thing is my intention was that it was an immersive experience. I wanted to immerse my readers into my world so that they could really, enjoy and lose themselves in it. And that's what a lot of the feedback has said. So I feel like I've achieved what I set out to do, which was really cool.
Yeah, it's always so nice when you get positive feedback. It's nice to get feedback in general. Like, yes. I've found for myself, just seeing and hearing that someone read the book just makes me feel good.
It is. And I think also, your book is not going to be for everybody. Not everybody's going to like it. So you've probably arrived when you get your first 2-star and 1-star, but you just have to put them aside and accept that your book is not for everyone. And hopefully their feedback gives other people understanding of what it is. So if it's something this reader didn't like, but the other reader does like, then they're more likely to read it anyway. So you can use them positively as well.
Let's dive into the writing a little bit. So you've written 4 books in this series, 4 full books and 2 novellas, correct?
That's what I've published. I have another 3 books written in this series. So I'm currently working on the prequel. So there's like an opening trilogy. And then there was one piece I couldn't fit in the trilogy, so I wrote this one, Sentinel's Recovery is the novella, which was just a side story, but I could not fit it into Sentinel's Justice, which was the 3rd book, which was really the climax of the initial confrontation. So I wrote one of the Sentinels who Gerald first awakens is called Valerian, and so Sentinel's recovery is really focused on him as he recovers from the battle and some of the other things that happened to him. So that was not planned and was absolutely extra, and I just suddenly, this story was in my head and I thought, I've got to tell it, and I could not fit it in the timeline, so I just wrote the novella. And then Sentinels Across Time, the fourth one with the boat, sorry, it's all backwards, is a time slip, which was quite a challenge to write, because obviously I suppose the Sentinels awaken is set in the current time frame for that world, and the Sentinels that he awakens is like the protectors or the ancient guardians of the world of Ramagran, and they were encased in these tall trees for like 3,000 years at the end of the last cataclysmic war that happened. And the only way for them to survive was to put them in the trees to protect them. But now there's another threat. She's got a new captain and he's awoken them, and so Valerian is the Sentinel that's been awoken 3,000 in the year's future. And then there are obviously other Sentinels in other trees in other locations, and as they travel through the different countries of the world, they wake more and obviously deal with more situations. And so Sentinels Across Time was the opportunity then to take Gerald back 3,000 years to the world before the Sentinels were put into the trees. And so it's like a slight slip between the two periods, which had its own challenges of its own. But
I was going to say, what was that like? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, you almost had to write two stories in parallel because you had to make sure they lined up. If something was happening in the current, it had to have happened in the past in order for it to happen. All these conundrums with time. So you had to make sure that he'd done it at whichever element in order for it to be happening in the other time as well, which was quite fun. But that was the hardest bit, keeping the timeline straight. I kept having to move things around. I'm thinking, no, that conversation hasn't happened yet. It's got to happen after the conversation. Move it around. So yeah, but it was fun.
Yeah, I can only imagine. There's so many stories, and even hearing, like, you must have written for a long time, because I'm thinking about myself. Like, I have 3 books. One of them is getting published later in the summer, but it took me over, I want to say, a 2-year period to write all 3. How long did you write all of these?
As I said, I started in 2016. I published my first one in 2020. So there's a 4-year gap, but I probably wrote them over like a 2-year period. But the nice thing with writing them all is when you sort of change something in a later book, I could go back and preempt it or shadow it in an earlier book. So because I hadn't published any of them, I could still tweak in the timeline, which did help, because then I didn't have something fixed in stone. I could change it, but obviously once I published it, you couldn't do that because it's done. but they just flowed. I was fortunate. I was very, very fortunate, and I just think I've never really had the chance or the time or the opportunity to write before then, much as I wish I'd started writing earlier, because I absolutely love it. I just can't stop writing now I've started. And I'm working on the prequel, which I'm currently editing, which is really the story of how the Sentinels ended up in the trees in the first place. So that's the prequel before Sentinels, 3,000 years ago. And then I have 2 books, book 6 and 7, which are like 20 years on from the last book that I've written here. So you go from 3,000 years ago to 20 years in the future, sort of thing. And that's the Sentinel series. And I've also written a paranormal fantasy, which is part of the Realm of Darkness anthology, which is all about angels. And it's really more about, not necessarily about angels, but it's souls. It's the souls versus the soulless, the light versus the dark. And just because it's dark and shadowy, why does that have to be bad? And why is all the good supposed to be in the light? And playing with opposites and looking at why we always, make these assumptions when actually it's not necessarily true. So that's Soul Breather, which is part of the Soul Mist series. And that's currently with the editor. And that comes out in October as part of a Realm of Darkness anthology. So I'm quite excited with actually doing sort of a different subgenre within fantasy even. And then I have a dystopian fantasy I've written. I've got second book of the Soul Mist series started now. I've written the first one, I've gone straight on and continued with the second one. So I'm writing that one. So there are just ideas bubbling everywhere. I just can't get them all down fast enough. So it's quite exciting.
No, that is super exciting. I feel like you can hear how enjoyable writing is.
I love it. I
for you.
so wish I started earlier, but I think there's a time and a place for everything, and obviously this was my time, and I'm enjoying it.
Yes, it's amazing. I remember when I first started writing a couple years ago, I had never really like dove into storytelling, and I had always wanted to tell stories. I always loved fantasy. I write dark fantasy,
Right.
and I love stories. I love characters. I love plot. And then one day I just said, you know what? We're writing a book. Like I'm doing it. And and then from there I just haven't been able to stop.
No, but I think
And
once you start, you've got the bug, and it just keeps going.
it is so and the characters start to do their own things, and
yes,
there's all these different areas where you could explore, all these different backstories. There's so much to writing. I was gonna ask you about world building a little bit because you've written a lot in this world. How has that evolved for you over the course of these stories?
Yeah. When I first started, I mean, they always say for your first book, never write a trilogy, just write a standalone. And I didn't intend on writing a trilogy when I first started. I was just writing a story. And it all started, writers have to ask questions to figure out why things are happening. And it was like a what if. I live near an ancient woodland, and I was walking through the woodlands once, and I was thinking like this, how old these trees were. And what if those trees could tell a story, and then that led, what if a man was asleep in the tree, and what if they woke up, and what if, and it just kept going. And that began, and that's how I developed the world of Remagen, which is made up of 4 different countries. So the first one is Vespiri, and it's built of leafy watches or shires. I live in England in the South Shires, it's leafy, it's green, there's lots of rivers, it's beautiful. And so Vespiri was really based on, southern England and that sort of idea. And I had all different watches. So there were like 6 different watches within that country that they're going to travel through. And there are different sentinels trees in each of those watches which protect these sentinel guards. So I started off with Vespiri, and then I sort of realized that it's not just going to be one country. Obviously there is other places that they're going to go. And as I was sort of writing the first book, and then you got hints of, there are things happening elsewhere and where this threat is coming from, that led to developing the world of Tyrolia, or the country of Tyrolia, which is one of the neighboring countries. But then it was almost thinking of, well, what's the country like? What's the environment like? So how would the people behave? What would their culture be? So Tyrolia became a desert, more of a desert, hot, sandy world, which obviously means there's not many resources. So people move around, so people become nomadic, and you barter rather than you have settled businesses and things like that. So then the people of Tyrolia became families who were constantly nomadic and moving around. And, and the second book, Sentinels Rising, is when he has to go to Tyrolia to resolve the issues that are happening in that country. And then to the north, obviously it gets colder. So we have mountains and ice and snow, and you have again that, a different ruling family, which is a duchy. So it's a grand duke. So you've gone from a king to a nomadic families to a grand duke. And then to the south is this archipelago of islands, it's exotic tropical islands. So really you're sailing around, it's fishing, it's, it's very agrarian and quite isolated and insular to a certain degree. So it was really the environment that drove the culture, that drove the ruling political structure, that drove the environment that my characters were going to go and travel through. And so the environment almost became another character, because it was very much, a direct impact on how the characters would behave, how they would travel, how they would react, and what happens to them. So
I know exactly what you mean.
It's such great fun.
Yeah, it's amazing, because even as you're explaining it, I'm traveling the map in my own head. Like, okay, we're going up,
another thing, isn't
going
it?
up there, we're going here.
Well, I have to draw the maps. I have my scribble maps, and I had a great guy who turned them into maps for the books for me. But you had to have it because you had to remember where everywhere was, because that's your world grows so much detail that you have to remember. And that city of Old Vespers always has to be in the west of the country. It can't suddenly move to the east, so you've got to make sure you know where it is and how long it took to get from one city to another, and that it didn't take one day one time and a week another, or unless there was a good reason for it, obviously. But consistency, I think consistency is key.
Yeah, it reminds me of like in my story, we have the slip, this region of two kingdoms that they've been opposed to each other in the past, but now they are in good terms. But they've never really been on good terms.
Yeah.
But they're a really important region to the overall kingdom. So then you have wars that happen there. You have battles. You have these political conflicts, and then to the west or to the east of them, they have these really war-torn lands that don't believe in the same religion or aren't as firm. And as you, and that's where all the conflict starts to come. So, and then we have these islands even further east, and it just creates an entire story and really tells the story of the world ultimately, for all the cultures. And I remember when I first started writing, just thinking about the one area. I was so focused on like, okay, this is the place where we start. This is where we are, trying to build that out, until I started to realize, like, I have this huge map. We have to find ways to get these characters.
Get around it. A reason to go and visit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like reasons. And then I created one reason for someone to travel, and then from there I found reasons all the time.
It's amazing how the ideas flow, isn't it? You sort of get yourself stuck in a plot knot, as they call it, and you're thinking, how do I get out of this? And you just go, and I'll go to bed and my brain will start working. All of a sudden, that's it. As soon as you relax, your brain's like, oh, you could do this or you could do that, and you have to have a notebook to hand because all the ideas flow as soon as you shut your eyes, and it's like, oh. But yeah, it's funny how they appear. All of a sudden, you'll have to go and capture an idea because you're going to fit it in somewhere. Maybe don't know where it is yet, but it's going to go somewhere.
It's going somewhere. It's going to be. I remember in my latest book, I was trying to figure out a way to. I had a character get dropped off somewhere in book 2. Right. And I was like, I have to figure out a way for them to be in another place because there's no phones. So there's no way they're going to be able to encounter this person. And I remember when I found the way, I was like, oh, this person's going to see them while traveling. They're going to be on the side of this thing. I have this other character who's going through that very area. And it was, it made me so excited and so happy.
It is, isn't it? It just feels so good when it clicks into place and it makes sense. And you think, oh, yes, sorted.
It's like, it was amazing. I remember I had my wife read the third book, and when she read the scene, she didn't know what was going on, and then she saw the character, and she knew in the moment when she saw the character reappear that now the other character who's their loved one would now be able to find them because of the connection. And it was so fun because it's moments like that make you say the world matters so much to the story, and then being able to see anyone that's tracing the map that really knows the map, they'll know that they're going to pass through here, that's going to lead there, and then everyone's whole thing comes back together.
That was quite the interesting thing, isn't it? Because in my first book, I found myself having multiple threads, more so in the first book. So I had characters going off separately, and then you had to try and bring them back together again and get them all back in the same place for a climax, which is similar to what you're saying. You've got to try and maneuver so that it makes sense that their parallel journeys actually then come back together, and it's quite fun when it happens. Touch points.
It's one of the more fun parts about writing sometimes, just to remember, like, just to be able to do that sometimes is just incredible, because sometimes you write yourself into corners where you have to really try to figure out how to make something happen.
And I mean, and that's one of the things, I use Excel as my tracking sheet. I have a tab for each book, a tab for the timeline, a tab for the characters, a tab for the environment, the details. And it's just keeping a hold of those details. I mean, sometimes I'll be in one book and I'll be thinking, has that happened yet? Or has that happened yet? Can I talk about it? And you have to go back and check. I'm not sure whether it's happened yet. Was that something that I've written in the future that hasn't actually come in? It's like making sure that you're not preempting something.
So with writing so much into this world, what has been the biggest struggle with writing a story so expansive over so much time?
I don't think it's been a problem. I mean, I just absolutely love the characters, and I'm so now immersed into the world that it's like almost home. You go there and you know how a character's going to behave, and you know how their relationship with each of the different characters, because obviously you end up with quite a a big cast when you're traveling around so many different countries. So I don't know that I necessarily had a problem. I think it's more a case of controlling the number of stories I want to write. I think I've got to publish these ones first, and that's I've sort of ground to a little bit of a halt. And as I was saying, I've now just started a Patreon. I've just published it today. Actually, I've been building it out. It's because I can't afford to keep doing 2 books a year with all the cover and the editing, and I've just released an audio book. It's just costs so much, and because being an indie author and being self-published, nobody knows me. So unless you can get your books in front of people, nobody is ever going to even know it's there. So I did dabble in Amazon ads, and I started learning how it is so expensive, you know, and it just wipes your budget out before you've even started. And so I've come to a bit of a financial crisis from that perspective, in that I want to do so much, but you can't do it all. You know, it's just not, I'm not selling enough books yet, and I'm not widely enough known for it to be profitable enough for me to invest it back into my books. So I've started a Patreon. So if anybody wants to support my work and would like to see more of my books, you know where to go.
Awesome. Yeah, it's crazy because I'm an indie author as well, and working to, 1, get exposure, but 2, keep things financially going. It does become a business at some point.
It is, because the outgoings are huge to begin with until you start selling books. And I must admit, I've only really begun to start selling on a regular number per day since I did the Amazon ads, and it's all because nobody even knows my books exist. You know, once you get them, the readers love them, but how do you get them in front of them? It's finding your target audience, and the marketing piece is the challenge. I mean, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I dabble on TikTok. I haven't done a lot, but you can only do so much. You know, I work full time because my books won't support me yet. I'd love to be a full-time writer, but I'm just not there yet. So I work full time. So you only have evenings and weekends, and you can only do so much posting on social media and you know, trying to get into conversations and joining other things when you want to write as well. So it's a balance. It is a difficult balance.
Yeah, it is the tougher piece of being an indie author.
It is, yeah.
Because so much of it does take time. One thing I started to really learn was, especially social media wise, like there's only so many places you can post and so many things that you can be good at, and
you can't do everything.
You can't do everything.
You have to sort of decide where you're comfortable and focus on that. And build your audience and all that. I've never had much luck with Facebook. Facebook always tells me no. And I almost give up. I do have an author page, but being an author page, you're limited in things you can do and things you can join. And every time I try and join a group to promote my books from the author page, it joins me as a person. And I want to join as the author, as my author persona, not my personal life, you know. So I struggle from that perspective on Facebook. So I tend to focus on Instagram and Twitter, to be quite. And then obviously I have a website, I have a newsletter. If you know, folks want to follow me and understand where I'm going and what I'm doing next, there's plenty going on.
Yes, and honestly, I always think the most important part is just having some people reading, some audience, because that's honestly the motivation that keeps me going most of the time. It's knowing that there's somebody that's excited to read the next book. There's someone that's invested in the world as much as I am, and
well, then you can talk to somebody about your characters. You always discuss things, don't you? And it's having someone to talk to and say, did you see that they did? What did you think of them doing that? You know, it's almost like they're a real person in the corner.
Literally, it honestly is the most fun. Just knowing, like my brother, he and I wrote the first book together, War in the Fallows. We wrote it together as a team, and now we're writing our own separate books off of the same universe. So he is like one of my favorite people to have read, because he doesn't know what I'm going to do with some of the characters. He doesn't know where their lives are going sometimes. So when he reads scenes and things are like surprising him about the world, or new objects have now come into play, it's just so much fun because he's just as invested in it as I am.
Well, he understands the context as well, so he knows the world, so he can see how it all fits, and it's like, and then it'll drive new ideas for him to bounce off.
Yeah, he read the end of book 3, the final book of the trilogy that I'm writing, and he he all of a sudden had 1,001 ideas. I was like, we could not write another book. But now I feel like it's coming because he definitely heard it. So for you, what has been your most enjoyable part of writing? Like, what is the piece that you enjoy the most? Is it the characters? Is it creating the settings? Is it plotting the story out? What's the most enjoyable part for you?
I think it's the combination of the world building and the characters. I love building the worlds. I do enjoy building the environments and everywhere that they're going to be involved. But the characters take over then. Once you've got the setting, that the characters really come to the fore, and you sort of fall in love with them, and you want to put them through as many trials and tribulations as you can, even though you love them. So so yes, it's a compliment. I just love writing. I just write every day, you know. I just couldn't not write now, and I even get to points where I have to take a day off work because I have so many ideas in my head. I can't concentrate until I get it on paper. And I have to get it out of my head and out onto paper or onto my PC, just so that I can then focus back in the real world, because it's all consuming sometimes. It's quite amazing. So yeah, and when you're really in the throes and in that zone, I mean, time just disappears, and you just go, and it's an amazing feeling. It's unfortunate it's not all the time, but I must admit, with Soul Breathers, which is the one that's in the anthology, the paranormal one, I had a couple of bare bone ideas, and I signed up to do this anthology. So, and then it's an external deadline. It has to be edited, finished, polished, ready by the end of August. So I've got 2.5 months or so to finish it off, and it's currently with the copy editor. So it's been through alphas, it's been through the betas, and now it's at the copy editor. So we're almost there. But that's the first one I've written to an external deadline, because obviously all of the Sentinel series was my decisions and when I decided to publish them. So that's sort of been a new experience. But I wanted to get involved in an anthology, to get involved with other writers, so that we're working as a group. There's like 40 of us. There's 40 books in this box set, and you get it it's 99 cents. So you go get it on iBooks, Nook, Amazon, anywhere. You can just look for the Realm of Darkness anthology, and there are some amazing books in there. I've had the privilege of reading some of them. I've sort of beta read some of them for other authors, and it's that building those relationships with other authors that that then you can reciprocate, and you'll have those relationships going forward, was one of the key pieces of doing an anthology. But it was also a new experience and gave me the chance to write a paranormal fantasy, which was really cool.
Yeah, it's always fun to dabble in different areas.
It is. And I've got a dystopian that I've written. It's sort of it's not a Hunger Games, because it's not, it's sort of that sort of world, but it's not a competition. But it gives you that sort of that vibe of a government that's brainwashing people, and controlling people, and it's how the hero realizes what's happened, and then how they try and take that yoke off. So but again, I'm about 90% written. I had another character that popped up, as you said, that sort of twisted my timeline a bit, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that person where they need to be at the moment. So it's just that last bit that I've got to finish, and then that one's done as well. But of course, I've got these books written, but then the expense comes in. You've then got to do the editing, and you've got to get the cover, and you've got to do all the rest of it, So although I have the books, it's they're just going to have to be scheduled until I can afford to do them.
Yeah, it is so fun to be able to write. I'm always coming up with stories. I have this notes app on my phone that has all of my story ideas and all the random things that come up, and it is so long. It has so many plots. I pitch ideas to my wife sometimes, where I'm like explaining to her what the story would be about and who the characters would be. And when I don't have answers, I'm like, I'll come with that later. Like, we'll figure that out. But
you just need the sounding board, don't you? Just to sort of solidify the ideas almost. It's just talking about it makes it real, more solid, So
yes.
Help.
I created I have this new story I'm working on for next year, and it just, for me, it's so exciting because I have all of these skills and all these things I've learned through this first trilogy that I published. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you what has changed? How have you grown since writing the first book?
I think I've become a little bit more structured. Oh, excuse me. I did, because when you first start writing, you don't know what you don't know. you're just writing, and it's not until you put it in front of that first editor that you realize, oh dear, I don't know anything about grammar, my sentence structures, oh gosh. And then you suddenly realize that there is a craft you need to learn. There is grammar, a basic sentence structure, there's the plot of a novel, there are the beats that you need to hit. So I instinctively wrote the Sentinel series and learned the technicalities afterwards. But because I read so much, and because I have read so many different books in different genres, because obviously although I write fantasy, there's an element of mystery, there's an element of romance, there's a thriller, you've got battles, it's not just fantasy, you're pulling in all of these different genre elements as well. And so even though you're writing that, I've lost my thread now. What was I saying? I sort of get sidetracked completely.
Evolving as a writer.
Yeah, and so you're learning all the time. Everything you do, you're learning something new. Each book taught me something else. And as I went from one book to the next, the first one was my most expensive because I invested in a development editor, a copy editor, a proofread. Because I didn't know how it all worked and what was involved. So I got other people doing it. And as I understood what was involved and what you had to do, so I could, do the formatting myself. I invested in vellum, so I can do my interior formatting. I understood the different options for covers and what you're looking for. And your thumbnail needs to really pop so that people can see it on Amazon at the bottom and say, oh, that cover looks good. And just things like that you learn as you go. So I think every book you learn something new. And I think that's the fun of writing almost, is that you're never not learning. And that's why I sort of went off and did an anthology, because there was new things to learn. And I've just done my first audiobook. So Sentinels Awaken was released on audio in March. And again, that's a whole new experience. I did investigate narrating it myself because folks were saying, oh, I love your voice, you narrate it. And although that's nice and it would have been lovely to have done it, I didn't have the time.
Yeah.
You just don't have the time. Although I did invest in a course and got a microphone and stuff like that and had a go, I didn't have the time to record it in the first place because, the first book is 11 hours. That's finished, 11 and bits, just over 11 hours. But it's just the editing, all of the software you've got to figure out, being able to cut and replace words if you pronounced it wrong, and all of that. That's, all of that finishing work that I just didn't have time to do it. So I found an editor or a narrator on ACX, and they did it for me, and he did an amazing job, and I love it. So, but I want him to do the next one, but I've had to push that out to the summer because I've got to save my pennies.
There's so much learning that comes in with writing, and it's every aspect from the actual writing itself and becoming a better author, just word choice and sentence structure and all of the little things, to publishing and actually understanding what to do. It's a huge process, and
there's a lot more to it.
It's a very commendable effort. When I first started writing, I was like, wow, I'm gonna give credit to every author I see, because this is not easy.
Not easy, no.
It's not easy at all.
And it takes a lot longer than you realize. Everything takes long. For those of you out there thinking of writing, just go write. It's an amazing experience. But if you're going to publish, which is a completely different thing, just because you're writing doesn't mean you have to publish. But if you decide to publish, don't put yourself under unnecessary pressure. Give yourself enough time, because the thing with if you're going to publish on Amazon, for example, once you put a date in there to publish it, they hold your toes to the fire. I think you can change it once, but if you miss it, they won't let you publish on Amazon again. So it's really important that you give yourself enough time to do all the pieces that you need and to build your marketing plan, because there's no point just publishing the book and nobody knows it's there. That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding your audience and getting the awareness out there. That's the marketing is the hardest part. Writing's easy. It's the marketing.
The marketing is a whole different animal. It's just a different world, different mind, different brain, everything.
It is. Yeah.
So where can people find your books? Where can they connect with you online?
So I have a website, which is helengarraway.com. You can find me on Instagram, which is Helen Garraway Author. Twitter, it's the same, Helen Garraway Author. So is TikTok. I do have Facebook. You'll search for Helen Garraway and you'll find me. So I'm on there. But as I say, I don't get much engagement. Not many people are following me there. And I just don't seem to have much luck with it. So you'll find me more active on Instagram. You can sign up to my newsletter and get a free novella So Sentinel Stirring, I don't know if you can see it as good because I've got the background. It's not gonna. So this Sentinel Stirring, I wrote it. It's like a reader magnet for my newsletter. So if you sign up to my newsletter, you can download it for free, but you can go on Amazon and get it because people were asking me to put it in a paperback and print it. So I did. So you can get it in paperback as well, but it's actually free to download if you sign up to my newsletter. And then obviously I've just done a Patreon, which is Helen Garraway. And there are 3 different tiers. So you can just support me, or you can pledge a bit more and get the ebooks early when they're published. And then the higher level, you can get a signed paperback before it's published as well. So Patreon's there as well. So yeah, you can follow me wherever. Just search for Helen Garraway and you'll find me, really.
Awesome. Thank you. You've been an amazing guest. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun. I can talk about books forever. It's such fun.
Honestly, me too. It's the piece of my day that makes me most excited is talking to other authors, because talking to other authors and then being able to write, because I feel like I get so many ideas just from hearing your story makes me say, oh, I have so many things now. so many things in my mind just after this conversation, and it's just it's storytelling, it's connecting with people.
It is. And I mean, I'm here and I'm part of the indie author community. So my Instagram, you'll find very much that, I review other indie author books. I do author interviews. I post them to my website. So I don't do live interviews, they're written ones, but you'll find author interviews on my site. So I try and support other indie authors as well, because it is difficult. Yeah. And, we all need to help each other get as much awareness as possible. Because as I said, if people don't know you exist and your books don't exist, then they'll never be read. So it's getting the word out and trying to support others to be successful. And hopefully I'll be successful too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Indeed. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Peace.
Scribble notes when I wrote these quotes. If I offend, pardon me, there's more of me to grow. Creative in my process, enjoy the show. The will is different when you recognize the different strokes. Different folks, same goals, we all want the most. So when we reach the top, we can enjoy the toast. The type of bread we get is fresh about the bakery. Told them don't play with me, with or without a degree, don't question my intensity. Bravery, similar to agencies that want to see you fold. So just pray for me. Einstein with my